The global oil market just handed the Kremlin a verdict that it cannot appeal. On January 4th, Brent crude traded just under $61 per barrel. This price held firm despite Venezuela's crisis dominating the headlines. That silence in the market is the loudest sound over the past few days of commotion because it means today oil scarcity is dead. Surplus is now the new law. Incredibly, it is now forecasted that Brent, not only in this quarter, but all year, will stay about $55 per barrel. But that is a fatal flaw for Moscow's plans. Moscow built its entire 2026 budget on Urals trading at $59 a barrel. But today we see that $59 per barrel is simply a fantasy. It ignores the discounts and the friction. A budget gap like that bleeds directly into the streets and into the barracks. It hits the bank accounts of the elites. The result for 2026 is a collapse in options. When the state runs out of cash, it must switch to coercion. Importantly, it will be fundamentally a game changer for Moscow because surplus oil destroys Russia's only leverage. In fact, surplus oil flips the geopolitical script because it strips the seller of power. In a shortage, headlines are expensive. In a glut, headlines are cheap. Surplus flips the script because the buyer is now the new boss. When buyers have choices, they make the rules. The price you see on the news is not the price Russia actually gets. The only number that matters is the cash that hits the bank. The real price is much lower than the sticker price. You have to just subtract the discounts. You have to subtract the hassle tax, the fact that they have to run a shadow fleet and they have to go find secret insurance. It costs them even more to dodge the sanctioned police. Ultimately, that hassle eats up the profits. And Reuters confirms that Russia's discount problem is back with a vengeance. In December 2025, discounts on Russian Urals plunged deep. In fact, they hit $20 to $30 below Brent at export terminals. So let's just do the brutal math of what this means in the real term for Russia. If Brent sits at $55 and the discount takes off $20, the realized price is $35. The Russian budget requires roughly $70 per barrel in order to break even. So that means that in reality, $35 creates a deficit of roughly $24 per barrel against the $59 a barrel plan. Across 4.3 million barrels a day, that is a total revenue loss of roughly $37 billion this year. That single shortfall wipes out 70% of the entire national wealth fund within just 12 months. Now, for Russia in 2026, these discounts are a second silent sanctions regime. They act as a penalty that compounds every single month. That $55 ceiling changes the strategic reality. It turns the war model into a permanent trade-off machine. Chronic low prices are lethal because they kill flexibility. A regime can wait out volatility. However, it cannot wait out a ceiling. A short dip is a management problem. A long ceiling is a survival problem. And a long slump forces the state to extract cash from its own people. It has no other choice because the bill for that war refuses to shrink. A small shift in global markets has blown a hole in Russian sovereignty. The U.S. Energy Information Administration provides the baseline math. Russia exports about 4.3 million barrels per day in the first half of 2025. A mere $5 drop in price, sustained for 1 year, wipes out $7.85 billion. But in geopolitics, this is not just a loss of revenue. It's far worse. It is a loss of leverage. Russia's leadership is trapped by three fixed bills that refuse to shrink. The war bill must keep the front line moving. The security bill must keep the streets quiet. The patronage bill, it must keep the generals and the governors loyal. These are not line items. They are the purchase price of the state itself. And when revenues fall, the system starts eating itself in order to survive. This internal hunger forces Moscow to look abroad for help. Yet, the diplomatic lifeline is dead. Just yesterday, on January 4th, OPEC Plus decided to keep output steady. This was not an accident. It was a calculated betrayal of Moscow. By refusing to cut output, the cartel effectively voted to lock in the surplus. They froze the price band exactly where Russia suffocates. So why did OPEC Plus do this? Why would they want Russia to suffer? Well, it's not directly because of Russia. It's because Saudi Arabia and the UAE are fighting a market share war. They are tired of losing customers to U.S. shale as well as to Brazilian offshore oil. To kill that competition, They need prices to stay low for a while, a long while, and Russia is just collateral damage in their war for customers. The cartel chose their own long term survival over Russia's short term war. This creates, though, a fatal divergence in national interest. Gulf producers like Saudi Arabia have massive sovereign buffers. They can borrow billions cheaply to wait out the low prices. Russia has high cost, zero access to debt markets. Moscow cannot borrow to plug the gap. It must burn cash. And the cartel knows this, and they do not care. They are not willing to give a hand to Russia because the external lifeline has snapped. The regime must turn its weapons inward. We see the proof in the redesign of the social contract. Look at the new VAT tax. It's going to be 22%. But that's not just a tax hike for the Russians. It is an admission of desperation. Russia raised the effective rate as of January 1st in order to extract cash from the daily life of its citizens. And this is the regime breaking its unspoken contract with its people. It lowers the risk of protest today, perhaps. However, it builds a deep reservoir of resentment for tomorrow. The twin of this, though, the other side of this, where we see the Kremlin now tightening what it does to its own population, is what Medusa reports. It says that conscription administration has become a year-round process as of January 1st. In fact, the Kyiv Post confirms the legal shift to nonstop processing. This changes the relationship between the citizen and the state. War is no longer a seasonal event. It is a permanent administrative burden. The strategic conclusion is quite stark, though. The Kremlin is now paying for its war twice. It pays once in blood at the front. It pays again in political capital at home. This shift is something that will change how Russians see the war. This shift to constant administration brings the war directly to the capital. Coercion becomes a routine interaction. Fear becomes normalized. We saw this clearly on Sunday, January 4th. Unidentified drones attacked Moscow. 200 flights were delayed at major airports like Vnukovo and Domodedovo, both located inside of Moscow. Air defense systems were active over the city suburbs. But that's the new reality of Russia, which we've discussed before. Air raids over the Kremlin are no longer emergencies. They're just part of the commute to work for most people. Control costs rise exactly when the battlefield flexibility shrinks. Just as the social buffer wears, it is then that the financial buffer also begins burning. The National Wealth Fund is supposed to shield Russia from these sorts of problems. Today, though, it is a signal of weakness. Russia's liquid assets stood at roughly $51 billion as of November 2025. But in a total war economy, that's not a fortress. It's just a ticking clock. A financial cushion turns into a countdown the moment that the revenue ceiling binds. The Kremlin is burning the furniture in order to heat the house. Speaking of which, if you want to help that, you can check out the first pinned comment below with the question of the day. Right below that, you can help the Ukrainian soldiers get more life-saving drones and other assistance to help win this war. Thank you. So let's consider this. When the money runs low, the peace treaties at the top also begin to break. Patronage is the Kremlin's operating system. Money and favors are the glue. They hold generals, governors, security chiefs together. Predictability keeps them loyal. Scarcity turns that predictability into ruthless competition. It also exposes physical weaknesses in the hierarchy. Look what happened with Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov. Recently, he appeared in public leaning heavily on a cane. In a patronage system, visible frailty in a key enforcer is not just a health issue. It's a sign to rivals that the old order is now vulnerable. This competition acts like institutional sabotage. Procurement, it turns into a battlefield between rival networks. Blame becomes the new currency in which they trade. Leaks become weapons. Policy dissolves into paralysis. The war capacity rots from the inside, even if the slogans stay loud. We see this in the rear as well, where partisans are now attacking military logistics in places like Novorossiysk. We see it in Krasnodar, where a missile brigade's transport was blown up miles from the front. The rear is no longer safe for the Russians. Repression, though, the cost of that continues to soar. And also it soars because the population is being squeezed. Efficiency plummets as attention splits. They are torn between fighting Kiev and fighting each other. Now it is predicted that the war is not only coming to Russia, but is inside of Russia. We can say safely that 2026, the definitive battle of this war, will be fought within Moscow. It will not be fought within Ukraine. Because ultimately this war that Russia started is one that it can no longer sustain. It doesn't have the economic capacity to, and all the data coming out today about oil is really a game changer. What we're seeing now is something to remember. Now, we have seen this movie before. The late Soviet hard currency squeeze. Back in 1986, the CIA warned that oil driven weakness was limiting the Soviet options. An academic analysis confirms the 1980 1986 price crash stressed the system. It pushed it to the very breaking point. The lesson for 2026 is quite clear. Low oil does not make Moscow soft, though. It makes the entire system very, very brittle. So looking ahead, the rest of the year is looking very good because the constraints today are something that we are seeing play out. The US sees Brent near $55 all year, with inventories continue to rise. Russia's budget relies on a fantasy of $59 per barrel. Even loyal insiders are sounding alarm. Billionaire Oleg Deripaska has warned this week that if oil stays near $50, the budget of Russia will collapse. Deripaska is close to the Kremlin. He is a friend of Putin's, and this is what he sees happening. He explicitly stated that the sacred state capitalism cannot survive at this price. Now, couple that with the new taxes, how do you think that Russia's going to do? It's taking money out of the pockets of people who already can barely afford to live. But now, not only will their government not have money, their people won't have money. Things just get worse and worse. And though the Kremlin today might say that everything is fine, underneath the propaganda, the chain of consequence is unbreakable. The price ceiling forces domestic extraction. Extraction destroys consent and drives up the cost of control. High control cost drains the patronage pot. This sharpens the elite rivalry. Rivalry, it creates paralysis, and that paralysis breaks the war machine. I've spent hours poring over the financial data coming out of Russia and what's going on in the oil markets, preparing for today's brief. And the reality is that the more that you look at it, the strategic reality tilts heavily towards Ukraine. Time and arithmetic favor Kiev because Moscow has fewer choices. Sustained pressure yields more results when Russia's margins are gone. This system loses its ability to adapt just as the internal pressure begins to peak. This leads us directly to the map of elite fractures. We see who loses funding at first and where the system thereafter begins to break. Thank you for watching. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.